Oh boy. Okay. Let me get myself together. Hey everybody, welcome to the Santita Jackson Show here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. It's a joy to be with you, and we got a lot to talk about today. We've been talking about these deportations of these students who have been who've been protesting uh, the tragedy in the Middle East. And it seems that the people of color, the students of color, have been targeted. I want to talk about that. But I also want to talk about how the media have shaped this narrative, because it's very interesting to see how these students have been shaped in the public consciousness, Ari Paul. And yet we're not looking at the people who broke up the encampments. We've not looked at them. They've not been villainized. I don't think you should villainize anyone. I think you should talk about people and report the story accurately, but it's not been happening. But, so much of what you have written, Ari Paul, you said, wait a minute, the elite media have really brought us to this point. And I think that that is a brilliant point that we've got to explore. But leading into that, I want to talk about these students and who they are and what rights they have. But dedicating the show to a dear friend and a leading light, a beacon for us, Ari Paul and Rania and Mark Fancher, Bob McKesney. Uh, Brilliant, brilliant thought leader, really one of the great public intellectuals, someone who really helped us to understand corporate media. He really kind of shaped us. He and Norman Solomon and Jeff Cohen and John Nichols, a few people, Noam Chomsky, have really helped us to understand just how corporate media work. Because I grew up with Walter Cronkite and Roger Mudd and these people who appeared to be, these uh, really people in journalism who just stood for truth and who were going to be as unbiased as they could be. Now, of course, we knew everyone had their biases, and therefore we knew that that was not exactly true. But now, with the encroachment of the corporations owning their concentrated wealth, it has changed the narrative. And I don't think we understand just how swept up we are in the narratives and how much they have arced us to be on their side against our own interests, I recall. We need to talk about that. But I want everybody to weigh in. And I know Mark Fancher, brilliant civil libertarian, lawyer, National Conference of Black Lawyers, but you do so much work with so many people. These deportations, these deportees, these students who are being apprehended by people who are masked. Sometimes they identify themselves immediately, sometimes they do not. And it has been reported in The Guardian. And if you look at the data, if you look at the people who've been arrested and who've been detained and who are being deported, primarily they're people of color. And what should we read into that, Attorney Fancher?
Well, I think that the attacks on these individuals are really a vehicle for advancing a much larger cause. On the one hand, there is every interest in stamping out any kind of understanding of the implications of the violent manifestations of Zionism, any discussion or understanding of it, any type of broad-based support that there might be for championing the rights of Palestinians. All of those things are bound up in this. And much of what we're seeing, I think, is part of a carefully orchestrated presentation or show for public consumption. There is the narrative that's been created that these people who are participating in these protests are anti-Semitic and that they're harassing Jewish students right and left, that they're tormenting them, that they're chasing them down, that they're keeping them from attending class, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, overlooking the obvious fact that a large number of the people who are participating in the protests are Jewish students. And the selection of people of color, uh, as the people who are targeted, has everything to do with making sure that that narrative is consistent, that it's not just anybody who is out there uh, working against the narrative that the U.S. government wants, but it's these others, these people who are here and shouldn't be here. They're not real Americans. These are people who are here as guests of the state and who have come here specifically for the purpose of making trouble and harassing Jewish students and supporting terrorists. And they are the people that need to go. So they have to be demonized. And when in fact, all that they are innocent students who are exercising their First Amendment rights, regardless of whatever legal basis there may be for them being here. If they're lawfully here, they enjoy the protection of the Constitution. They have First Amendment rights. They have the right to speak and to write and to protest and to do all of those things. That if that's all that they're doing and that's all that can be reported factually about what they're doing, then that doesn't make them frightening enough. That doesn't make them scary enough to uh, be the targets of this type of treatment. So therefore, you have to make them look dangerous. And in order to do that, you have people who are dressed in masks, and who appear to be, the kinds of people who would be engaged for a SWAT operation or something like that, to descend on them as though they are these terrible people. Maybe they have bombs strapped to their bodies or something. They want to make it look like that. But in the process of doing this and creating the show, this presentation for public consumption, in the same way that they're, deporting these people down to El Salvador with the cameras rolling for public consumption to make it look like they are really making the U.S. less dangerous by getting rid of these people. In the process of doing this, they're trampling over these students' constitutional rights. As I mentioned, they have the right under the First Amendment to engage in that type of protected activity.
even
Uh,
as even as non-citizens.
oh yes, yes,
Okay.
they're lawfully here, and they enjoy that right. They enjoy that right. They enjoy the right to due process. And in other words, if they're going to be deported, if there's something that has some type of property value that's being taken away from them by the state, then they're entitled to have the opportunity for transparency and for a hearing and for an opportunity to uh, defend against, to know what the case is against them and to defend against it. Uh, for the young man who's been disappeared essentially, there are implications for his Fifth Amendment rights, and for his right to counsel and all of those kinds of things. So, there are lots of problems associated with this, and it really helps to feed into the narrative that they want, which is that these dangerous people of color from other places are invading the U.S. They're coming in and they're taking advantage of all of the privileges and opportunities that educational institutions have to offer. And then they're going about creating havoc and mayhem and harassing Jewish people at every turn. And there's no proof of it, but they're probably dangerous. They're probably uh, banging the drum for Hamas and other terrorists, and they're dangerous people, and they need to be kicked out of the country. That's what they want the public to believe.
Hmm. Ronnie, Patrice, this is all happening as we're going into the 2026 election cycle. How how do we? I mean, how do you talk to young people you're trying to get involved in the voting process? Many people who feel who are really they have really they're disaffected, and they don't believe that the Democrats are fighting for these kids. They're essentially very young people who are really just getting, Ari, they're just their wingspan. I mean, this is when you get to college. This is when you start trying out ideas. You do so many things that are legal, and that help you to really to get your understand your really help you to develop a view of the world. I mean, what are we supposed to get from this, Rania,
Yeah.
in this
Yeah.
political environment?
I mean, I think that there's multiple things at play here. I mean, exactly what Mark was saying. And I also think they started with Mahmoud Khalil on purpose. I
Mhm.
think he was a test balloon, and we see it's continued. And I think the intent here is, the idea, the psychology is no one cares about Palestinians or the Palestinian cause. So how far can we push this? Obviously, that is not actually true. We've seen that for for months and months. The coalition that's come together in support of sovereignty and liberation and just peace and all the things. But I do think that that was intentional. I think the idea was like, we're going to send up this test balloon, and I think the intent is not. They're not going to just stop. They're not going to stop with green card holders and student visas and all of those things. I mean, I fully expect, and he's forecasted it. They've talked about naturalized citizens. They've talked about, they're already talking about infringing on natural born citizen rights by, you know, going back to post 9/11, um uh, uh just disgusting laws as a way to get into our technology and things like that as US citizens. So I just think all of this is sort of, these are the steps that they're taking in order not to just, it's not just about a single community, right? So I think these are the steps that they're taking to silence and instill fear, and to keep us all sort of running around and chasing after so many different issues. And frankly, there's so many different important things that are happening, right? And Bannon said, it's that whole flood the zone, I'm using air quotes, I apologize for being off camera, the whole flood the zone idea. He said all we have to do is flood the zone with the press, and make it so hard for the press to cover everything that's going on, that then we can basically do whatever we want to do. And we're seeing it literally play out, and we're seeing day by day the rights of people, our constitution being just completely decimated every single day. And we're also seeing people make excuses, like very smart people saying, making excuses about why or how or who's being literally abducted by our government, and how it's okay, and how, the justifications and all the things. And we've all heard the poem, and or the saying that, first they came for the communists, etc. So I just think we're seeing it all play out right in front of our faces. I don't think any of this is unintentional. I don't think any of this is accidental. I think, like I said, I think they started with Mahmoud Khalil on purpose. I think they're starting, just like you said, Santita, with people of color on purpose. And I think they're coming for the rest of us too. And I
Oh,
think if
but
anybody thinks that that's not true, if anybody thinks that they're safe, if anybody thinks that their silence is going to keep them safe, you got a really, really sad, horrible awakening coming.
well, I think they're coming after everybody, and I know you and Mark Fancher have to leave before I pivot to Ari Paul, because Ari, you got a lot to deal with here, because Ari says, wait a minute, these elite media institutions have paved the way for all of this, but you start with a war on higher education, and I want you to explain that, Ari, because I feel like that's what this is. Attorney Fancher, your closing thoughts before you go?
No, I think that it's really a wake-up call for all of us to understand the extent to which they're willing to go in order to stamp these things out. And the way to fight back is to continue to spread information, spread the truth about the implications of all of this, not just for the students, but for the many who are almost certain to be impacted by this sort of thing um, in the months to come. And so we'll stand by and keep praying and keep organizing, keep educating.
Well, we're going to have to do that for sure. Um, Ronnie Patrice, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think just to kind of build off of what Mark was saying, I think it's exactly right. And I also will just remind us all, I don't know that it's hard to say I've never been so deeply disappointed because my God, I feel like I exist in a state of disappointment and anger these days. But in our educational institutions, what we've seen from Trump, we've seen it, we saw it with Canada, we saw it with Mexico, that when people stand up to him, he backs off. And all we've seen, whether it is our Democratic leadership that you already know all my feelings, so I'm not going to go into it again because we don't have time, or it's these college institutions, they're just backing down. No one, I have not seen any of these institutions that have power and money, frankly, behind them stand up to him. In fact, they have preemptively caved. We saw Colombia, for example, preemptively cave to him. And so I I just I don't know what it's going to take for them, these like the level of privilege at an institution like Columbia, to stand up and say, nope, sorry, we don't take your $400 million, we'll get it elsewhere. But what we've seen is he is Donald Trump is a paper tiger or a paper dragon or whatever that saying is. You know what I mean? And we've seen it. We've seen it happen. He has backed down. He'll make whatever excuse, and that's fine. I don't care. He can make whatever excuse he needs to make himself feel better. But we've seen him back down. And I think we got to keep that in mind.
If I can add to that, I think that the dynamic that's present with a number of these universities is that there are Zionist forces that are part of their alumni and their donors and others who are already putting pressure on the university administrations on these and related issues. And so the pressure that comes from the Trump administration just gives them more leverage and so there's really no constituency that has the type of influence that they might have that can push back. And so it's coming at the universities from two angles. One from those that are influential within the university structure, and from Washington. And that's making it very difficult for the universities to do what they really need to do. I think it falls to the rest of us to give them the spine that they lack.
Well, and I think the deportation should be of concern to all of us because they're taking people out of the country, or certainly they're talking about taking people out of the country, and they've done it, and they're moving people around the country, and they will do that with citizens. And we don't know where this is going. We've read about this in other countries, but now it's here. Attorney Mark Fancher, Ronnie Patrice, you're free to stay, but I've reached out to Ari Paul, and I'm so glad that he is with us. I've been reading this brilliant journalist's work in fairness and accuracy in reporting, and in the Nation, Jacobin. I've just Vice News, just down through the years, and I'm always tracking him. You're one of the people that I always want to know, what are you thinking? What's on your mind, Ari Paul? So I was struck when I went to FAIR, which I read through every day because I don't know what else they're going to be reporting. Elite media paved the way for Trump's targeting of Colombia. And you started off with President Trump's war on higher education writ large. Why did you start there? What do you mean, this war on higher education?
Well, first of all, I mean, the institutions of higher education have been sort of a target for the far right in this country for decades. I mean, I think you can go all the way back to Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan and the backlash against the 60s, uprising and the things that were happening on campuses all over the country. That's been a big thing that animates the right, that college campuses are these hotbeds of radicalism. There's Marxist professors brainwashing our youth into the hating capitalism and hating U.S. foreign policy and protesting. They're getting out of the classroom and protesting war. This has been a big thing that's been a big part of the right. And it's been a big part of Trumpism, a part of MAGA, that J.D. Vance has said that professors are the enemy, that they're out there spreading wokeness, they're out there spreading DEI, diversity and equity and inclusion ideas, that they are out there telling everyone that U.S. foreign policy is bad. And so there has always been this idea, but it's really taken traction inside the Trump administration, largely because there's kind of a class divide. They can sort of say to a lot of middle America, these elite institutions that have money, that cost a lot of money, so it tends to be wealthier people that go to them, except that's also not true of the state schools. But it's a way to kind of paint an outgroup, us versus them. These are the traitors within our society. So it's been a political target for them for a while, but it's mostly been rhetorical. Now, with these arrests, with the Trump administration saying we're going to withhold $400 million, forcing Columbia to capitulate, threatening to go to inquire about, I think they have a list of 60 schools. This is a big part of Trump's promise that we're going to put a restraint on institutions of higher education, but also it's because there's a certain truism to what they're saying, that in a society that's capitalistic and perhaps kind of conservative, college campuses can be a place where there's free exchange of ideas, where you can talk about topics that are uncomfortable and discuss things openly. That's a very, very scary thing to any regime that wants to be authoritarian, which is why you see in most other countries like Hungary or Russia, any place that's drifted towards authoritarianism, they go after universities. So that's why it's happening here.
Ari Paul, you said that, when you wrote that, the targeting of Columbia University is very, very specific. It's not the hacksaw that the chainsaw, excuse me, that you saw with Elon Musk. You're just like, no, you said this is surgical. This is with a scalpel, because Columbia and New York City means so much to the country and to Donald Trump in particular. Can you help me to understand why you said that Columbia, they were very intentional? Because like one of the super Ivies is the University of Chicago, right? I mean, and you have the Ivies, and then you have the schools that are really Ivy League institutions, and the University of Chicago is one of those schools. And the encampments were disrupted by SWAT teams, and several of the leaders in those encampments, they were denied their degrees initially. So it's like, which of course is designed to send a chill, right, to everybody. I've got, Ariel, hey, you know what? It's a party here. I've got Ariel Gold with us, but I've got Ari Paul. I've got two Aris with me. I'm very happy. And so, but we're talking about, and I'm going to send you this article, Ari. I might have sent it to you already, because Ari wrote about the elite media paving the way for this moment that we're in with these schools. And, and I have to say, this is just very interesting. So why Columbia? Why do you think that they've been so focused on Columbia University?
It's multi-layered. For one thing, Columbia was the institution that housed Edward Said, one of the greatest, Palestinian scholars in America, who taught in the United States. And so he was there. A lot of his people he mentored were there. And so a lot of the Palestinian thought that's in academia actually comes from Columbia. So Columbia is associated with that. And you might remember about 15 years ago, there was a push by some right-wing organizations to get professors fired for their quote-unquote bias on the Middle East conflict, by including someone named by the name of Barry Weiss. She's quite famous in journalistic spheres. So that's part of it. Part of it is that Donald Trump is from New York. He has a connection to New York. because it's where he's from. He feels spurred by it, so he wants to do something that's very, very in New York to sort of kind of make an example of it. And also that the encampments at Columbia were, I believe, they were the first. I mean, they sort of took out over the country and the world, but Columbia was very much seen as a sort of a starting point, which is related to the fact that it has also been an incubator to, well, not just Edward Said, but also, as a part of there was the 1968 uprising. I believe it was 1968 when they're at Columbia. So it's always been associated with that kind of movement. So it's very symbolic.
So when we look at what's happening there now, because now you have oversight of the Middle East and African Studies Department, right? I mean, you see a clamping down there. How do, as we look at all of this, because now you're right, Columbia is the focus, Ariel Gold. Everybody's looking at Columbia. How have the media handled this? Because they have always had a hand in these things, Ari Paul. These students have been othered. We look at they don't report the extent to which young progressive Jewish students have been leading this movement. It's like they want to hide these kids, which I think this is a horrible thing. And no one is, we're not hearing these children. And then, and I think of Jonathan Greenblatt in this meeting with ADL, with Jewish leadership, in which he said, look, you guys, you need to understand what's happened here. This is not, you think this is a right-left issue. This is a generational thing. There's a shift. We have lost the narrative here. You don't really understand what's going on. And I think it's like the world shifted. It changed, Ari. And no one really even, I think that we saw that we didn't see that in the 60s, but that's what happened to our grandparents. The world just changed. It left them behind. You saw that in the 80s, things change. But where's the media been in all of this? So the corporate media.
Right. I mean, the piece that I put out in FAIR really details how a number of institutions, New York Times, Washington Post, and The Atlantic, played what I thought was a very irresponsible role in the lead up by doing a couple of things, equating certain chants and political positions as inherently anti-Semitic. One of them being the idea of one Palestine united from the river to the sea, that this somehow means the annihilation of its Jewish residents. The idea of taking what was once historical Palestine, first Ottoman, then British, and then liberating as its own independent country, is often thought of the idea that it would be a place democratically run like any other, in which all of its inhabitants, Muslim, Jew, and Christian, and anyone else, lives with equal rights regardless of their identity. That's a very far cry from the idea that it's somehow anti-Semitic or is a call to ethnically cleanse the land of historic Palestine. Another part was sort of saying that these protests had, while yes, we believe in free speech, we need to somehow clamp down on it because it is just so outrageous and so hurtful to many people. And one of the ways that the media kind of told on itself was we had a column in the New York Times by John McWhorter, who has spent really his career for arguing for free speech rights from the right, sort of defending right-wingers, sometimes often defending very racist and nasty people on grounds that, well, I don't agree with that, what this person has to say, but we have to tolerate them and we can't bring sensitivity politics into this to silence that person. And then he teaches at Columbia, and then he all of a sudden says, I'm not going to subject my students to some of these chants because I believe that they're hurtful. So he's sort of showing that there's two standards, that places like the Times and the Washington Post and the Atlantic can dismiss wokeness and this idea that free speech is under attack by cancel culture and wokeness and too much identity politics. But when it comes to the subject of Palestine, well, they have to protect everyone's ears. And this is just patently ridiculous. It's just to say, you wouldn't see a piece in the New York Times that says, you are not allowed to talk about the Armenian genocide because it might be hurtful to our Turkish students. You won't see them say, you can't say that Tibet should be liberated from China because it might offend our Chinese students from abroad. There would be a defense of free speech and expression. But there's just a sort of carve-out rule for Palestine, and this was very much reflected on the opinion pages of those two newspapers in this magazine.
Are they not concerned? And feel free to jump in, Ariel, because of course, the executive director of the Fellowship of Reconciliation. Because I would think that Jeff Bezos, of course, it has been reported that he said to President Trump that his staff, that the reporters are crazy. He can't control them. Like, what's going on with you? Oh, they make me crazy. I could lose money here because, basically because they want to be heard. I guess they're too liberal. In his current worldview. Are they not concerned about credibility? You know that corporate media are mistrusted and distrusted more than ever before. Their numbers are falling. People are not watching. People have moved to alternative media. I'm not saying that that's the best thing, because I think that sometimes we mindlessly turn, but away, because you really do have to engage in critical thinking. You have that responsibility. But what about? I mean, what does this do to this particular estate, to media?
Well, I think with the Washington Post, unfortunately, Jeff Bezos has ceded that territory long ago when there was the scandal that came out that they were not going to make an endorsement of the presidential election to sort of insulate itself from the incoming administration, and then saying to the editorial page that from now on we're going to be a voice only for free market ideas. It's not going to be a free-for-all discussion. I mean, this was pretty much a shot that he was no longer going to be running a serious newspaper. And unfortunately, in the history in this country of very wealthy people buying newspapers, buying media outlets for the express purpose of controlling debate. And I think from Bezos's position, the less debate there is, the better. So I think, he's not worried about the credibility. He's worried. He's concerned with limiting discussion and dissent in this country. With the Atlantic, I think the Atlantic has a fan base and a readership that unfortunately, buys into a lot of this ideas that we're under attack by wokeness and by too much openness, too much DEI, too much cancel culture. Because certainly they keep publishing this stuff and they see a reason to keep doing it. The New York Times, I can't speak for what's inside there. I do sometimes wonder if there's a debate running inside of, are we undercutting ourselves because they still have a reputation of having some good reporting. But I think it's a very valid question. What could this do to their brands? But in the case of the Washington Post, I think that damage was done long ago, and I think it was pretty deliberate.
But look at the New York Times and how their handling of Mahmoud Khalil, how that was shaped. Because I had been following Bret Stephens and Bret Stephens' opinion pieces. I'm accustomed to this because, hey, I grew up with Public Enemy #1 in his time. So, I mean, I get it. That having been said, in real time, we're watching these narratives shaped around these people. And, and Ariel you made the point that it's like with Mahmoud Khalil, you got the wrong guy because he's so soft-spoken. He's such a genteel guy that it's like his persona flies in the face of the narrative that the corporate media have shaped of him. I mean, but we don't really see them on television. We don't really hear them reported on. First you, Ari, and then you, Ariel.
Yeah, I mean, there was a quote from Mahmoud Khalil from CNN, actually, in which he was asked about the Jewish participation in these protests, in which he very plainly said that Palestinian liberation and Jewish liberation were very intertwined. It's very flies in the face of the caricature that they're trying to paint of him. I will just add one more thing. I think from the media perspective, as we talk about not just Khalil, but now there's almost too many of these people to name. It's growing almost daily. The fact that the media might say federal agents arrested, federal agents detained. Mm-hmm. These are secret police who are disappearing people.
Okay, I need you to say that one more time.
These are secret police who are disappearing dissidents. I think it is incumbent upon media in this country and from other countries who are covering it not to treat the United States like it's a democratic republic anymore, that this is Chile in 1973 or East Germany or what Russia is today, and needs to talk about it in such terms, because if we don't, we are sugarcoating the gravity of what it means that these individuals who are not accused of crimes are taken away by plainclothes, unidentified officers and taken to places where they can't, where they will have no due process or are not getting due process. And again, as people said earlier on this show, just because it's happening to non-citizens doesn't mean this may apply to citizens in the future. So it's very incumbent that we cover this with the gravity that it deserves.
Do you think that is frightening and unsettling to Americans to think that we have secret police who are apprehending people? I mean, look, no one, Mahmoud Khalil's wife kept asking, who are you? They wouldn't tell her. I mean, first of all, this is 2025. If someone rolls up in your house or in your apartment and they don't identify themselves, that is frightening. And they took a lot for granted, or maybe they wanted something violent to happen. I don't know. But that was such an ugly scene. I mean, the video that I saw of it, it was a frightening scene. But the media have the power to paint someone sympathetically. They do it all the time, and they also have the power. They have the power to villainize you. When O.J. Simpson, yes, I'm using this example, when he was beloved by the American public, he was lighter skinned. They actually reported on this, but when he became the villain, he was darkened in photographs. We do that. It's the science of this thing. You know that. So I'm just trying to find out where this is going, because like you said, the secret police, this is taking me to another place that I was hoping that America would move away from it. Because look, I'm from a people in America. Let's not act as if the Klan did not come into people's houses, take folks and lynch them. I mean, we've had this, but now it's formal. It was formal then because these were law enforcement people then. But here we are. It's expanded, and we're doing it. It's state sanctioned. I mean, like on the books, you have people who go to court and who will justify this, Ari. And that to me is very, very unsettling. And you're the first person who on this show at least have called them the secret police, who are disappearing people. But that is what they are. I mean, they're grabbing people on the streets, Ari. But the narrative is not being shaped that way.
That's why I say I think it's important that journalists do that and start taking this very seriously.
But they're not, Ariel. They're not doing this at all. I mean, this is like normal course of business, and it is very, very unsettling. And where do you see this going, Ariel?
No, we're good. This is the roadmap or the makeup of fascism, right? It is to scapegoat and to target those that they feel are vulnerable, right? And so we really began that under the Trump presidency with targeting of Latin American immigrants. And now we see that this is spreading over to dissidents. And what happens when we target people and scapegoat them is we stop seeing the people as human, right? We start seeing them as a threat to the rest of us. And we stop caring as much, about their rights. And you said this, Santita, and it's true. I was surprised that the administration started with Mahmoud Khalil, somebody who's like squeaky clean, right? It's very hard to find distasteful, still not illegal, but even distasteful things that he has said. He has said, he speaks about joint liberation. And, now we see this arrest at Tufts University as well. And so this is, the preparations of dehumanization, because yes, and we go back to that very old saying, like, first they came for, and this is very much the case, but apparently they didn't even feel that they needed to start with the lowest hanging fruit, like the lowest hanging fruit being people here only on student visas who maybe had an arrest on campus or said some unpleasant deplorable things. They didn't start with that, right? They started, up here with permanent residents, and the story has faded. I hate to say that, right? It has faded from the news cycle. And initially, when Mahmoud Khalil was arrested, the conversations were around the First Amendment, and you had people like Bill Maher, rampant Islamophobe. You had people like Bill Maher saying, I don't like this guy, but he was absolutely within his First Amendment rights, and those First Amendment rights have to be protected. But that's kind of faded now. And now we see the second arrest. I'm sure it's not the only other arrest, but now we see the arrest at Tufts taking place, and we see Columbia having capitulated. So this is the pattern, and this is the beginning, moving at a very rapid pace. And we've seen in the US before, when we haven't had First Amendment, the respect for our First Amendment rights. And we are watching McCarthyism again. And right now, the issue is Palestinian rights, and the people being targeted are Muslim Arabs without citizenship. But who is next?
But I'm trying to figure out, Ari, when will we learn? Because these people who are icons of the freedom struggle, the people who really make people around the world admire the United States, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Medgar Evers, Malcolm X, I mean, you can just keep on going, right? They are villainized in real time by the corporate media, Ari. I mean, the New York Times and all of the corporate newspapers, we didn't realize that we didn't have the verbiage for it 60 years ago. We didn't call them the corporate media. We just thought that they were fair and balanced, no pun intended. They would accept blind items from the government, from J. Edgar Hoover, that would shape the narrative. And I'm just wondering, I mean, it's like, and it's not stopped. Where are we going with this? Because now, like you said, we have a secret police. The corporate media don't describe them as a secret police. But when I see these people who are masked and who are apprehending people and who are breaking into people's homes, that's what I see. That's what I feel. But it's not being reported that way, Ari, at all.
Yeah, I think, to Ariel's point, the capitulation by Colombia is sort of similar to almost a capitulation by the media. Part of that has to do with keeping appearances, keeping the money flowing, staying in touch with donors. And there's a similar dynamic with media. They want to keep, they need to stay close to power. They want to, be ingrained, in institutions of power. They don't want to be too much on the outside, and so fighting too hard kind of ostracizes them. So they don't want to. The elite media don't want to kind of seem like an attack dog towards the government. Although that's kind of what media are supposed to be, and what people are hoping that they become the role that they play. I mean, even in the last administration, the Washington Post took on this phrase that democracy dies in darkness, that we're going to be this check on government power, and a lot of that has faded. There's been some bright spots. I mean, I think the fact that the Associated Press has fought back against the Trump administration on this ridiculous idea of the Gulf of America, that they were removed from the White House press room because they refused to call it the Gulf of America and still call it by its original name, the Gulf of Mexico, is a sort of a small step to them saying, no, you cannot tell us what to print. No, you cannot, force us into saying certain things and punishing us that way. So there's been some solidarity around that, which is great. But I don't think that the gravity of what's happening to universities is being dealt with the way it should. And unfortunately, you sort of see some editorials in the New York Times and the Washington Post say, well, what's happening at universities now is terrible, but they don't really take into account how much of what we talked about before, which is that they laid a lot of the groundwork.
Yeah, but I don't, because like when you see Jeff Goldberg, who is included on this chat, I mean, and I saw a little bit earlier how, all of these certain members of the media who are in Mike Waltz's contact list. And you know, when I see the Atlantic, I think of the Atlantic Council. I mean, there's some media outlets that are establishment, and they're really mouthpieces for the establishment. Or am I off base, Ari?
No, I mean the kind of the irony of this whole situation with Jeffrey Goldberg is that we people in the press and people who watch the press sort of know him as someone who had been very supportive of the Israeli regime. He had spent some of his life in Israel as I believe a prison guard. That he pushes a certain narrative. We've written it fair about their closeness to the Saudi regime and sort of running sort of very big fluff pieces about how great the new Saudi regime is and how friendly they are, even though they're this terrible theocracy, but because they're against Iran, we're going to be on their side. There's always big questions about him and what he is selling. I believe he was a part of the whole WMD's false reporting on. Although I should qualify that. Someone should check that before they call us on spreading things. But he's always been thought of as a kind of close to the foreign policy establishment of the United States, or at least that's sort of his inclination. So the idea that he's kind of a left-wing liberal outsider to the Trump administration is kind of hilarious to a lot of people. But
where did that come from? I mean, it had to come from somewhere.
There are numerous ideas that he was already in contact with these people and that he was accidentally added, or that he was added on purpose as a sort of Trump administration saying like, yeah, we're taking our conversation to signal, we're gonna fist pound each other whenever we bomb a small poor country like Yemen, and what are you gonna do about it? There's a little bit of we're wondering how much this was deliberate, and someone like the Atlantic editor was just kind of a pawn in this.
How do we change the narrative? I mean, because I think you've outlined the issue, the problem. But one of the things that concerns me is that, this does shape public opinion. It does. And if people don't get the story straight, or if they feel more than that, if they feel that they've been lied to, that becomes another set of problems. And many Americans do not trust increasingly the establishment, period. And that is socially unsustainable, Ari. I mean, Ariel, you can't have a peaceful society when the American public don't trust anybody. And I feel like that's where we are.
Yeah, we are in a dangerous and dark place, and I fear that what started with a trickle of detentions and let's just call them expulsions, right?
Yeah.
From the country is soon to turn into a vast number, right? As we have not been able to stop the detention of Mahmoud Khalil, and we'll see what happens with his deportation order. But I think we've seen in so many ways from the Trump administration a real testing of us. Trump will do something and then he'll kind of pull back and be like, oh, well, I wasn't aware that what was it, the Foreign Enemies Act. I wasn't aware that had been invoked. That must have been Rubio. And so I think what we're seeing here, and maybe that's why they started it at such a high level, such a bold repressive action, is I think it may be a testing of what we allow to happen and how much folks that aren't campaigners for Palestinian rights are going to stand up for the First Amendment here.
Well, I mean, Ari, because we're consumers of the news, at least we think that these media outlets need us to subscribe to them in order to survive. I'm not so sure how true that is. What do we have the power to do as consumers?
Well, certainly in the case of the Washington Post, I mean, they lost a lot of subscribers, both the Washington Post and then the LA Times. And the LA Times had also gone through their non-endorsement scandal. And in that case, the LA Times, their publisher, there's been accused of a lot of different interventions into the editorial page of the newsroom there. That they do lose subscribers, and people should vote with their dollars, and they shouldn't invest in a news organization that they don't believe is serving them. And that should, in a perfect world, get back to the people who publish these things and say, okay, well, wait a minute, if we want to be relevant, we have to be, serve an audience. It's hard to say because there are still, there are things like advertisers that guide a lot of the revenue for news organizations, especially newspapers. But I think people have to be louder in the street. They have to make themselves known. I think that there has to be a way to say you can't not cover this anymore. You can't. You have to pay attention to how awful this is. It's going to mean a lot of people are rising up, speaking out, and hopefully that will attract attention and make and change the coverage. It's a big Goliath because they're so big and we're kind of so little out here. But I think if the outrage gets louder, I am hopeful that there are news organizations who will take this more serious. And I think the more we have conversations like this, in which we implore media organizations to say, like, look, you've got to take this much more seriously. Hopefully, we can get somewhere.
Yeah. Ariel, I mean, you're on the activist side. What do we do?
Yeah, so I've been encouraged. I was very encouraged after Mahmoud Khalil's arrest of the actions taken by Jewish Voice for Peace, the direct actions in Trump Tower and also outside ICE offices. And I think we have to keep that up, and we have to keep this in the news cycle, because if we don't keep this conversation happening, then if the news isn't paying attention, then we don't have average people paying attention, and we allow this to happen. And as test cases, as the first of these happen, we open that door. And it's difficult, right? These days where it's one thing after another coming at us. And I think we have to really come together strategically to figure out where our best targets are for protest, and to not give up on that, and to really strategize and set our goals.
Ari, what's one more thing you want us to know? Because coming out of the civil rights movement, political education was at the core. You had to learn how to protest, how to demonstrate. I mean, they would, Reverend Jim Lawson, your dear beloved friend, they would, and my parents were part of this, they would put you in a camp, and you would be hurled, all kinds of abuse would be hurled at you, so that when you went to the Woolworth counter, or when you marched and when people called you names or hurled things at you, you had been trained not to physically or verbally retaliate. What's that one more thing that you want us to know? Because I think we need media education. I mean, I don't think we understand, for example, how important an email is, how important a phone call is, how important a canceled subscription is, comments, raising our voices, and how important it is for us to analyze what it is that we read.
So how do we get that message across? I think another thing that people can do is there are alternative media, and to show that people will turn to those things. In the Iraq War times, in the War on Terror times, when the internet was sort of just becoming to be more ubiquitous than it previously had been, the idea that someone could log on to the Guardian or the BBC or German radio or all sorts of different foreign news outlets really kind of opened up the news sphere, that like, they're actually talking about different things in the foreign media. We have a lot more that people should turn to those sources and say that, look, we will turn elsewhere, and I think we will be better informed.
And you deserve that, everybody. You've got to be informed. If you want to be a subject, you give the reins of power to somebody else. But if you want to be a citizen, you got to be actively involved. And we can do it. It is our country. It's our world. We have to decide that we are going to be in charge and not have other people rule over us. We need to give them consent to govern. I don't want to be ruled. I don't know about you. Ari Paul, The Nation magazine, Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting. I love my Janine Jackson and Jim Narakis and your whole team there. You all do such brilliant, brilliant work down through the years, but Jacobin, The Nation, Vice. Anytime I'm always looking for Ari Paul everywhere. I Google you all the time because I want to know what is he thinking, what's on his mind. And of course, my girl Ariel Gold, who gets me into all kinds of trouble, but I still love her. The Fellowship of Reconciliation. Everybody, sending you so much love. I'll see you on Keep Up Alive with Reverend Jesse Jackson this weekend. Who knows what we'll be talking about? The news cycle changes every second of the day. But we'll be there on iHeart Media. Sending you so much love, everybody. God bless you, Ari. And my love to your son and to your family, your beautiful family. My love to you, Ariel Gold. My love to my Morning Stars and to the AM 950 radio family. God bless you, everybody. Have a great one.